what we have for you tonight is a brief history of the planning efforts in the Grandview district. To some of you, this will be new information, and to some of you, it will be a refresher. But in the weeks ahead, we expect to have a sketch plan submittal on your agenda, also on the City Council agenda, about the city's former public works site at 5146 Eden Avenue. And while a lot of folks have been very familiar with this project, we recognize that a lot of planning commissioners weren't here 10 years ago when we started these conversations. So I thought it'd be helpful to run quickly through some of the efforts that we've done to date. Happy to answer any questions along the way as well. So the first thing I wanted to recognize is just that the Grandview district, the area basically from City Hall on the east to the Vernon Avenue apartment, or to the apartments and other commercial buildings along Vernon to the west, is an area, it's a neighborhood with a long history. Originally, if you look at how some of the roads were laid out, those were the original mill roads. Eden Avenue was originally called Eden Prairie Road, because that's the only way to get to Eden Prairie. Interlochen back in the day was called Hopkins Road, because that was the only way to get to Hopkins when they were unpaved gravel or log roads. We've come a long way over the last 100 years. In the image on the right hand of the screen, that is in the mid-1950s, when the intersection of Vernon and what is now Highway 100 was a much simpler intersection. Vernon Avenue was a state highway. It was State 169, because what we know of as 169 today did not exist. It ran through here in Edina. You see some of the current buildings. The McGreevy Funeral Home was originally Cedric's Restaurant. The Perkins there today was originally a nursery, not a daycare, but a place where they sold trees. You see the big oak groves. One of the native oak in the area right now, that's an on-ramp, the big curvy on-ramp. But also something very important to recognize is the neighborhoods to the northeast and the northwest have been here since about the 1930s, so they've grown over time. So while the transportation network has changed quite a bit, it's interesting to look at how this whole area has changed from decade to decade. In fact, on our website and actually on the Edina Historical Society, there's aerial photos. About every 10 to 15 years, we were able to pull up old aerial photos to see how the area changed. It's kind of fascinating, but I don't want to go that far back in history tonight. The Grandview district is also unique because it's one of the areas where the city has made proactive efforts. Going back to the early 1980s, this was the city's second tax increment financing district. That district was first created in 1984 with the intention of redeveloping some of the older industrial properties. Those older properties were assembled and eventually raised and rebuilt and reborn as the Grandview Square condominiums, as the Class A Grandview Square office building, as the Hennepin County Library, a park, and the city's senior center. Those proactive efforts also went on in 2008 when the city made a difficult decision that it was time to relocate and expand the Public Works Department. They had been operating in their old property just down the road here on Eden since 1962. And over the decades, their trucks got bigger, the city got bigger, the needs got bigger, the staff got bigger, and it was time to move to a bigger facility that could actually accommodate a modern operation like we have with our streets and water departments. So in 2008, a new site was purchased. The original intention was to sell this old site to help pay for the new one, but through a number of conversations back in 2008, it was decided to delay any sale of the property to consider other uses for it, including a potential public use. And with that, 2008, with that decision, that set off our 10-year conversation about what should we do with the old public works site. Over the years, there have been a number of different community advisory teams. The first one was convened in 2009, and that work ultimately culminated in the small area guide report that went to the Planning Commission, your predecessors, and the City Council. Most importantly, they settled upon 7 guiding principles. And essentially the main theme of the principles was that this area is special. We don't want to just do business as usual. We shouldn't just accept anybody that walks off the street and wants to do a new project. We should be more strategic and more long-term focused. So the 7 guiding principles, I'm not going to read through all of them, but a couple highlights. It was recognized that there were several publicly owned parcels. The old school bus site, the old public works site, a lot of the MnDOT parcels and side parcels by the highway. And it was the goal that we could leverage those publicly owned assets to create a vibrant and connected district. Throughout the many of the planning conversations, themes came up about how disconnected the network is. That once you get there, for example, at Jerry's Foods, you're there, but it's difficult to get to the library, even though it's across the street. When you're in the gas station, it's difficult to get to the next place because there's a lack of sidewalks, bike paths, et cetera. So one of the goals was to make a vibrant and connected community. We also focused on the fact that the area is, it's at odds in the fact that it serves the neighbors, it's a neighborhood center, but it's right on the highway. So it sees a lot of traffic, not necessarily on the local roads, but there's these regional connections, but ultimately the desire is to keep it as more of a neighborhood center, not to compete with Southdale or to compete with the Mall of America or those types of things. And the third one that I'll focus on now is number 3 here, and that's to turn perceived barriers into opportunities. So there was a lot of conversation back in the early years about the railroad tracks. Is it a barrier? Is it something that is preventing us from being incredible here? Or is it an opportunity that we can turn around? The same with the public works site, which from one perspective is a 35-foot hole in the ground. From another perspective, it's a great opportunity to do something good. So these 7 guiding principles have endured over several rounds of conversation and planning. That initial effort also led to a planning grant from the Metropolitan Council. And with that effort, we got a little bit more professional, hired consultants, hired some advisors, and also convened our second community advisory team. That was a group of about 50 people, all volunteers from the community. It was led by our planning commissioners at the time. And that was another close to 2-year effort of more public meetings, more drawings, more sketches. Those 50-some folks broke down into smaller teams to focus on specific aspects. Some looked at transportation networks. Some looked at land use. Some looked at the public realm, whether it be sidewalks or civic facilities. And ultimately, they came together and worked on, they completed the development framework. So this ultimately was approved, went through the Planning Commission, went through the City Council in April of 2012. And with that effort, we'd originally hoped to call it a small area plan, but ultimately, after all these meetings, we found that the folks could agree on a lot of things, but we couldn't reach agreement on height or density. And so those are the 2 things that you'll find noticeably missing from this, and that's why we called it a framework rather than a small area plan. And it's my understanding that this year we're going to finish that small area plan and finish those 2 big questions about height and density. So when the framework was finished, then staff got to work starting to implement it. We knew in general where we wanted to go. We knew that the city had a vacant parcel. We knew that the school district wanted to get a new facility for their bus garages. And so in 2013, the city issued a request for interest, an RFI for developers, recognizing that we didn't want to do this on our own. We wanted the expertise from the outside development community, but we weren't ready to sell the land. We weren't ready to put a stake in the ground and just take a check. We wanted to be a true stakeholder and a true partner in that. At the same time, the school district started their conversations. What to do with their property? Did they sell? Did they move? Where could they move? Could they get financing? Lots of various questions. In 2016, that was another big planning year. We created the Grandview number 2 tax increment district. recognizing that we were on the cusp of having some great things happen. And in our framework, we have pages and pages of wishes: sidewalks, intersections, crossings, water and sewer lines that are the right size for the future. And that's a lot of cost. So we recognize that a tax increment financing district would be the right tool to help pay for some of that infrastructure. So that's some of the key things to date. What I wanted to focus on next was that 2013 and 2014 RFI, where the city reached out to the development community to see if we can find a good partner to work with. It was not hard to find good potential partners. There was a lot of developers very interested in building in this part of Edina. And ultimately, we did a fair amount of advertising and promotion and ended up with 10 different developers that wanted to be our partners and put proposals together, put packets together. There was no price tag associated with any of these because our goal wasn't just to sell the property, but it was to find the right partner and find the right thing to build on this property. From that group of 10, we selected 4 different finalists to interview. Doran Companies, Franshu, Greco, and Kraus Anderson were those 4 finalists. The City Council and a group of other folks, including some but not all the plan commissioners, met in an interview in an open setting and heard their pitch and saw what they had in mind and looked at their strengths. And ultimately, the City Council selected Franshu as their potential development partner. And Franshu was joined by a team of different architects, land planners. They had a contractor to help inform us about construction costs and some of those practical things. And then we kicked off about another 2-year process, we called it the collaborative development planning, because we knew that we wanted ultimately not just to plan, we wanted actually to get something built on there. And this really kicked off a whole nother firestorm of public meetings, online surveys, newspaper articles. We did community comments. We had open houses. I reached out to 120 different community groups in Edina. I didn't even know Edina had 120 different community groups. We talked to PTA type groups. We reached out to the Boy Scouts, all the different sports leagues, the theater groups, to see what, we've got a couple acres here, what can we do? So we amassed a great deal of suggestions, comments, and some concerns. That effort culminated in 2015, where we settled upon a concept to consider building a community arts and culture center. It was about 70,000 square feet, so a pretty good sized building. By comparison, the city hall is about 20,000 square feet if you take the city hall plus the police station. So it was 3 times larger than this facility. And then that would have been on about half of the property. The other half of the property would have been multifamily housing, apartments. And the general concept was that if we sold a part of the property to a private developer, we could use that money to help pay for part of this public facility. So that went through another process, and then ultimately the city wanted to look at the costs on our own. 70,000 square feet, that's a big building. It's an expensive building. It could be an awesome building, but we engaged the architects at HGA to further refine what this 70,000 square foot building looks like, who it serves, what things happen there. We engaged a group called Pros Consulting to do a market analysis and cost study. What does it take to run, staff, and maintain a building of this size? And ultimately, in 2016, the estimated price tag had risen to about $45 million. And that was determined shortly after the school district had gained approval for their referendum for the big investment in our schools, which is a really positive thing for the community. But at the time, the city council decided that it wasn't the right time to take any action. $45 million was a lot of money. It was a community center that some people really were excited about, but not everyone could support. So since 2016, we've had to let things cool down a little bit. and let things shake out. I included a few images in the packet of some of the different options that we considered. I think my recollection is that we ultimately had 9 different options. We started off with 3, tested that with public meetings. People tended to like like 1 or 2 of those, so we came back a month later with a few more options going in that direction. But we considered a mixture of uses, civic buildings, residential, office, commercial, indoor space, outdoor space. Ultimately, in 2016, in addition to these images, we also considered the option of putting only public uses on the site. And that would be a combination of indoor space and outdoor space. So we tested a lot of different designs, but ultimately that effort yielded no decision. At about the same time, we still wanted to make progress on a lot of the other goals for this area, so we worked on a district-wide transportation study. The professionals at LHB headed up a team that was truly a national effort. Nelson Nygaard out of San Francisco. Alta Planning is one of the recognized bicycle and pedestrian planning teams in the nation. So they came together because, again, this wasn't just your normal district. We didn't want to look at it from the same lens as every other project had been looked at. We really wanted to focus on how this place could be special, whether you arrived here by car, by bus, on foot, or by bicycle. So we worked on that study and also tested traffic impacts. What happens if we do build a giant community center? There's a lot of traffic that's associated. What happens if we don't? What happens if it goes residential? What happens if it goes commercial? So the transportation study gives us a lot of different guidance and input about what various consequences are if we take different actions. And then one of the other more recent studies, in a way unrelated to those but still interconnected, is the Grandview Green, that concept of building a covered lid over a part of Highway 100. And that initial comment or concept goes back to 2009, that very first community advisory team. One of the main problems that was identified was just the difficulty in having people get across the highway. Very easy to cross if you're in a car or a truck, more difficult if you're on foot or if you're on a bicycle. And I believe a few months ago, one of our consultants, Katie Clark-Sieben, had given you an update on that Grandview Green concept. So that's still a work in progress. But from a staff perspective, we see all these various studies coming together to help make an informed decision on how to proceed. Just about a month ago, our city council made a decision that it's time to keep moving, that it's time to pick up those pieces and see if we can reweave a project that makes sense and is financeable and supportable. And so the city council executed an agreement to continue that relationship with Fraunhofer, to be informed by all the work to date, from the 2009 study to the 2011 study and the 2015 study and the 2017 studies. And the goal, the direction, was to come up with a site design that is not only informed by these decisions, but makes progress, makes tangible progress. There was 5 key elements that seemed to rise to the surface after all these years of conversation. While not very glamorous, this concept of district shared parking is still a good concept for the site. Rather than having 5 different property owners do 5 separate parking lots, we thought, can we have people work together? It's worked before for us. It's worked very well for us. Let's keep that as a fundamental. Housing continues to be a hot topic, as you'll hear later tonight. You've heard months at every meeting for the last several months. The City Council is committed to seeing not just market rate, but affordable housing, including on this site. So if there is housing, they want to make sure there's a combination of both. And one of the other challenges that the city faces is the cost of maintaining and improving our aging art center. It's a good operation in an older building that is kind of hidden, and so one of the goals is to create a new home for that allows it to springboard to success in the future. And the fourth element was kind of a fun one: food. when we did all the public outreach back in 2012 and so on, people wanted a place to have a cup of coffee, have a meal, have lunch, meet their friends, hang out, be social, meet their parents, hang out with their kids, meet their buddies or neighbors. And so one of the other ideas here for this site is to incorporate a unique marketplace, maybe a food hall, could be a restaurant, but something, again, not just like the same normal thing. So with that in mind, the City Council did engage Franchu about a month ago. Since that time, we've been meeting with them every couple of weeks to put some ideas together. And in the near future, we're going to be going public with those. So we've scheduled a community open house, reaching out to all the hundreds of people that have already shown interest in Grandview, reaching out to that. We've got a core group of about 90 people that have been involved since day one. We call them our Grandview alumni. There's a couple alumni in the room here. Reach out to those to have them come to that open house. And in the 24th, your second meeting in January, the Planning Commission will see the sketch plan. Franchu has engaged DJR architects to work on that. So that will be coming forward. Then they'll go to City Council in February. And based on that first round of input, the City Council will then make a decision. Is this it? Is it time to go forward? Is it time to make a decision and do something, or not? There are options in front of us. We don't have to sell the property. We don't have to build on the property. We don't have to build a public facility. But boy, 2018 seems like it's the right year to make a big investment for this community. So we hope it can be a good one. If this goes forward, one of the deadlines that we're looking at is the deadline by the Metropolitan Council for comprehensive plan amendments and site plan amendments. So if we proceed, we'll probably come back in May, actually April or May, to see if we can get that final approval and get something going. So that's in 20 minutes, that's some history. That's where we are today, and I think where we're going to go in the future. I can't predict what the shape of the thing is or what the actual uses are or what the cost is, but with your input, with the community's input, with direction from our elected officials, we hope to figure that out. So that's what I have for you, and I'm also happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Bill. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Nondorf. That was very good. The bus garage site, which I believe was that a Trammell building that's going
Correct. Trammell Crow got that project.
Is that, I mean, that's housing. I mean, does that change what you might want to do or would be needed on the public works site? I mean, or is that a different housing market that they're tapping there?
Good, very good question. So I don't know tonight. We have hired a market researcher to look into that market demand. There's been so much housing built in Edina. There's more on our plate on deck, whether it's a single family house or apartments, maybe condominiums. Those might be coming back. Different folks told me that at this point in time, there's still strong demand for housing, especially in first-ring suburbs like Edina, especially in good locations with very good school districts. And some of that housing demand is generated by seniors downsizing, some by baby boomers, and some by younger people moving up to their first home, apartment, condo, or whatever. So there seems to be strong demand, but that is a question that we thought it'd be wise to hire a market consultant to actually give us a little bit more informed decision. Since the city owns this property, we want to make a smart decision.
If I could add to the Trammell Crow project, that's a senior project with services. So whether that would be the use that Franchu is considering, not likely.
Sorry, any other questions? Commissioner Hobbs on the...
In the presentation you talked about with the lid, you found no fatal flaws at this point. What constitutes a fatal flaw? I mean, is that from an engineering standpoint or a cost standpoint, or
It could be any number of things. In my mind, a fatal flaw is something that that prohibits us from moving forward. When we met with MnDOT, if they would have said no way in heck and stomped out of the room, that's a fatal flaw. If the United States DOT said, no, these are terrorist attractions or something like that, and we're not going to allow these, that's a fatal flaw. If the thing doesn't pay for itself or doesn't have the potential to generate enough revenue to pay for itself, to me, that's a fatal flaw. So those are three big ones. There's thousands of other smaller ones. But so far with that project, I mean, we've continued to meet with MnDOT officials every couple weeks to see what this looks like and how it might work. And so far those conversations are still ongoing. So with that project, we expect to come back to the Housing and Redevelopment Authority in March and give them an update of what we've learned. So we've had public input, we've had technical input, we're getting market input, we're getting engineering input. So we'll bring that together in March and then have a conversation about, is this the right time to move forward with that type of planning? Is it time to move forward with that type of construction? So we're still a few months away from that answer.
All right, thanks.
Commissioner Lee.
Bill, thank you for coming to the meeting. I know that you're here today because at the end of last year, our Planning Commission was informed that Grandview was going to pick up again. So we are all very cognizant of the fact that that property has sat empty, but for good reason, and that there was an extensive public engagement and involvement process. One question, obviously, and I'm still thinking that because obviously we're doing small area plans and we're always looking at how are we incorporating the public input, and then how can we assure that the plan reflects the public input. You have summarized that there has been a process that preceded this. I was wondering if it might not be a good idea to actually summarize what that public input was. I don't know if that means reviving previous documentation, but as a starting point, that would be really helpful to know. I was made aware of the fact that actually more than half of the public input at that point did not want housing on this site. May or may not be true, but I really can't respond to it. So some of those things, I think, will make a difference as to what is being proposed as you go forward. The food hall idea does appear to be a great one, but again, can it be substantiated with public input? Saying you want to have a cafe or someplace to eat doesn't necessarily translate into a food hall, so I'm just a little concerned about how some things were interpreted. So again, it goes kind of back to revisiting what were those tenets or parameters that were last established. I do recall attending that last meeting where there were like 3 scenarios, and to me they were mostly massing studies, kind of looking at if we put 3 levels of this and parking here, what would it look like? So I think that at least in my mind is sort of how things were left. My understanding was that there wasn't a conclusion or at least a strong preference, and so things were tabled. But as we pick it up, I think it would be really important to understand what were the factors that were that we couldn't reach agreement. Was it height? Was it density? So now if we are being asked to review a proposal by the developer, it would be good to know so that we could kind of view it in light of that. Moving forward, is Francia going to be the developer? Is that a set thing? I think I heard you say that no, actually, if there were none of these plans generate sort of what the city feels it needs, really don't need to accept them. Is that still the understanding, or did I not get that right?
Yeah. So 2 questions. So in response to your first one, we're happy to provide more information as this project moves forward. There was so much input over the years that were collected, and there were strong opinions across the spectrum. Some people loved housing, some people hated housing, some people loved green space, others didn't think this was the right place for green space. So those opinions were all over, but we're happy to put a summary together for the next for the next presentation.
I might actually suggest that that go up on the website. I know there's probably a Grandview page, but if this is really starting up again, I think it's important to establish sort of a base of understanding. Got it now. It's 2018, so this is where we started from. Where we start from is what came before, and I know it's a long process, but it would be important for everyone, particularly our residents, to understand why are we picking it up now and how does this continue on.
Yep. If you go to adinamn.gov/Grandview, you go to the Grandview page, and there's 4 tabs, one of which is called Planning for Change, which was one of the titles of the 2012 chapters. And there's a brief history. We didn't include the meeting notes from every, dozens and dozens of meetings, but we included all the major milestones, all the key pieces are on that page. And so that's out there already. We can probably supplement it with some additional things.
Yeah,
based on
some
your request.
documentation on statistics and numbers, and even if it's showed unconclusive, it'd be important to see that.
We'll see if we can get some of that up. And then in response to your second question about Franchu, at this point, the city has an agreement to work together to explore options. If the city council likes the options and if it makes sense, I would have to think that they'll want to work together. If they come to a conclusion that the options aren't making sense or the financials aren't making sense, there's no obligation that we have to do anything, frankly, or that we have to work with the Franchu company. But at this point in time, based on our past experience, based on our current experience, the agreements are assuming that we can find a way to work together, but there's no obligation.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall at the last time, it was Franchu was on board also who proposed I want to say 3 options. There was something known as a walk-away clause, because I know there was concern at the time about taking a path of, should the city hire an architect consultant or design team to flesh out some concepts, or should the city work with a developer? The city chose to go with the developer because the developer had their own architects on team, and so it was kind of we get it all wrapped up in the deal. But to assure the public at that time that, don't worry, we understand the architects are hired by the developers, but they're not working for the developers. They have to produce something that we as a city would also like. So there's a little nuance there. If the city hires the architect team design consultant themselves, there's no question about they're going to have to put forth stuff that the city approves. When the architect is part of the developer's team, they have to please the developer as well as the city. But we kind of see that two-headed top there. So I believe there was something in the contract that assured, well, in the end, there was sort of this walk-away clause. Do you recall what that was and how did that work?
So in the 2014 agreement with Franchu, when the city interviewed the 10 different development teams, we also interviewed the designers, the site planners, the landscape architects, and the architects. And one of my recollections on why the council selected the Franchu team was based on the team. They liked what they saw. They liked the group of people that came together. And in that agreement, there was, I've never referred to it as a walk-away clause, but there was certainly an agreement that the city would pay for our costs, our out-of-pocket costs. The developers would pay for their out-of-pocket costs. But if the city, took some steps that hurt the developer, like if we took the designs and walked away to a different developer, we would agree to reimburse them for stabbing them in the back, basically. There was another clause that if the city failed to make a decision in a timely fashion, the city would pay a portion of those architectural fees. And that's ultimately what happened. At the end of the day, we couldn't make a decision in time. The Franchu company was generous. They actually extended another year, saying if you can make a decision in another year, we'll waive your fees and we'll eat that cost. But that would have been late 2016. The city council decided that it wasn't the right time to rush something through.
And so how did we end up with this Franche, going forward with Franche now? This, another RFI did not go out, or RFP, did it?
It did not, and staff considered that. We've been taking public input and planning for 10 years. We could do RFPs until the day that we all no longer walk this earth. But in the last year, staff has gotten a number of calls from developers that are interested in working on this site. It's time in the market. If something wants to get built, this is a great time to do it. And ultimately, again, the city council decided that we have an agreement with Franche. They abided by all the terms of their agreement. They actually came in with some different team members. They decided to use DJR architecture, which back in the 2014, 2015 era, when we hit a couple rough patches, trying to come up with a plan, we were getting close to coming up with a plan that a lot of people liked, and we needed to rough out, or we needed to smooth out some rough edges. The city asked DGR to come in on our behalf and smooth those out. So for this latest effort, Franche engaged with DJR directly, and again, I think when the city council made this award, part of that agreement includes the team that's working on this.
So I guess I'll just ask this last question, then I'll let my other commissioners speak. I might have a few other thoughts, but the city did incur some cost to Franche because we did not actually move forward with that developer the last round. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So this time round, it's a whole new contract. It isn't tied to previously what happened, or it isn't a way of getting out of the fees that would have been due. There was no kind of agreement that was made to use this particular developer.
Yep. So the agreement is online. You're happy to review it, but no, it's a clean break. I mean, 3 years ago, the city spent some money. Grandview spent some money. Different architectural teams spent some money. Nothing got built from that. But with this contract, we're starting from a fresh point moving forward.
And with it being held by the HRA now, is there any requirement that there needs to be a public vetting process or a public review process? It's slightly different when it's the HRA, so if you could explain that a little more. I know it's the same members of the City Council, but it's the Housing Redevelopment Authority.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for that question, so I don't have a full answer, but yes, there are slight changes in state law that govern City Council action versus HRA action. It's really in regards to the sale. So from a zoning and planning perspective, if the site needs to be rezoned, all those public procedures are exactly the same. Doesn't matter if a public entity owns it, private person owns it, that makes no difference. So all that public process is the same. When it comes to the final decision to sell a piece of property, whether you are a council or an HRA, you still have to have the public hearings, you still have to do those things. So from a public lens, we'll still be doing the same steps, but working through the HRA, we have a little bit greater latitude about how we work and how we work out the financing of it, but that does not change the public process.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Down here? I just have a couple questions. So the marketing study that you mentioned, there's another one being performed. Will we see the results of that before the sketch plan, or is that?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if it'll be complete. It will be complete next week. I don't know if it'll be public next week.
Okay.
So this is regarding the sale of real estate. So usually when the city or the HRA owns a property, some details we keep close to our vest while we negotiate deal terms. So that is in process,
Okay.
but I don't know exactly when it'll be public.
All right. Well, so is that study looking at what uses are on the site? Is that what you were saying?
That is
Updating, or is that a different study? I mean,
So-
I know we've got the old one, so this new one isn't also looking at what highest and best uses now.
Yeah, so I apologize, I don't have the contract about what exactly they're looking at in this market study, but there's two key things that stand out in my mind, and that is the impact of new housing on the cities or HRA's property in light of all the other new housing in the area. We don't want to cannibalize and approve a project here that then hurts 5 other projects that we just approved within 2 miles or so. So that's one concern. And the other one is this food hall concept.
Right.
It all sounds good in theory, but there was just another story today about all the restaurants that closed last year. The story didn't mention all the awesome restaurants that opened last year. But food is the food hall in particular, that's kind of a nebulous item. So if the city wants to be serious about some kind of community marketplace like that, I'd like to have some outside expertise about whether or not that's viable. Is it private? Is it public? Does it pay for itself? So those are the two particular issues we asked the market consultant to look at.
Okay, but we won't see those results in time for the sketch plan, most likely.
Probably not.
Okay. And then this is just probably a question for you, Carrie, just to remind us, where is the small area plan for Grandview? What's the status of that? And when will we know?
Yeah, so it's part of the comprehensive plan, likely to happen summer, fall time range. But as Mr. Neuendorf mentioned, we have all of these documents that have been done.
Yeah.
We want to still use those, but there will be an additional step to put together those things that we haven't settled on, like the height.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Commissioner Nemiroff.
Thanks, Bill. So just to follow up on one of Chair Wilson's questions, and that was, so you're, on January 22nd, you're going to be having a community open house, and January 24th, you can come back and have a site concept. And I assume that the site concept is going to include, it's going to address some of the issues that you have in your site design slide, which includes district parking, affordable housing, market rate housing, the art center, and the food hall. Do you feel that it sounds like you're farther away, for example, on resolution of where you are with the food hall. On some of those items, are you feeling that you're closer to, yeah, we kind of know what we want to present at the city community meeting, like the art center? Do you feel pretty good about where you want to go with that?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the council gave very clear direction what the 5 elements they feel are supportable and fundable. So the design team at DGR has been putting together various concepts of that. Again, remember, this is sketch plan, so you're going to see something that it's more than a massing study, but it's far from the end product. But as we start to weave these pieces together, I think there's 2 things that I'm looking at or most concerned about. One, what's the planning impact? Is it a good plan? Is it a good site plan? How is traffic impacted, et cetera? The other piece that we'll have to run through the HRA and the city council is, does this make financial sense? I mean, whenever there's a new public facility, that costs money. And it's not dollars, it's millions of dollars or potentially tens of millions of dollars. Those are big decisions. It has to pass muster on both scales. The information that we present at the open house on the 22nd is the same information that your team is going to see. I think your packet goes out Fridays? Yeah, so that information will be out on Friday. We have the open house on Monday and are back here with you on Wednesday and then a city council a week or 2 later. So it's the same information we're presenting. And again, we're presenting it in the interest of providing the information, but more importantly, recognizing that that's another starting point. We want to hear from the Planning Commission, from the neighbors, from the Grandview alumni, from the other residents and business owners in town that have had a long vested interest and have long been part of this conversation. So what we share on that night isn't the final thing and it's a yes or a no answer. It's a starting point about, is this the right direction? Can this work? And how can we make it better?
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Quick one? Okay.
All right, I just had a couple more follow-up things. My greatest concern is that what comes forth needs to match the framework. I know that it's stated in your PowerPoint that it does, but that is just a statement. Again, show that, put it on the website. What are the elements of these 5 or 4 things that council has decided they want as part of this? How does that match the framework? I think the food hall thing is something that's going to feel as though it had no public vetting. I'm just trying to be frank here. Also, it's problematic that we don't know the financials and we're getting a sketch plan in front of us. I think that will be problematic public-wise as well. If you're saying that the reason the city's pitching this is because financially it feels like the right thing to do, and we don't even have any prior public support of it, we certainly have to have the evidence that there's a reason why they sense that. So whatever you can do before that January 22nd date or first date, need to address that. And then it feels very much like the timeline has been set. With Carrie saying that we don't even expect to get the Grandview report till fall, what's driving this? That's going to be a question that the public will ask. What's driving that now? And the timeline you have set for us doesn't allow for much public input. I get it that there will probably be a public spot to speak at the city council meeting, I'm guessing. But again, there's no time there to react to it, and we always want to leave some time that shows, okay, we heard you, and here's why we can or can't do anything about that at this point. So I'll just leave you with that, but thank you very much for this update.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, so next on the agenda is the sketch plan review.